Welcome to Shelf Life. Today we are at Bookophilia again, and this time we have Melanie Schwapp and her new book, Dew Angels. And Melanie, welcome to Shelf Life.
Thank you so much for having me.
Girl, I read this book from cover to cover without stopping for anything except sleep and to munch a few things because I found it so interesting. But before we get to the book, tell me about you, Melanie.
Well, I started out by being a housewife looking after my 3 children. I had been to school, to college, studied mass communications, and found that while I was at home with the children, if I didn't do something else, I was going to start speaking in baby language all the time. So I started to write. And I wrote a children's book that I used to tell my children stories. I wrote a children's book from that.
Has that been published?
Lally Mae's Farm Sus, yes.
Okay.
In 2005.
Actually, I know that book.
Yes. About rolling calf.
Yes.
And then as soon as that one was published, I said, okay, let me try something bigger. Let me try a novel. So I started to write The Dew Angels. And 6 years later, 1 year of publishing, of getting it edited and published, now we have Dew Angels.
And it is one awesome book. But
thank you so much.
I'm going to talk about the book in detail later on. But you are a landscaper, aren't you?
Landscaper and interior designer.
So there's really, what is the connection between landscaping and writing?
I think it's creativity. I love to create.
Okay.
And I think it's just part of the creative process. You know, seeing something that is barren and making something out of it. Seeing a home that needs a few touches with color, decorating, making something out of it. And I think that's where my writing comes from too, just creating.
Just being creative.
Yes.
And any of your kids picked up this writing?
You know, I think all three of them. My son refuses to believe that he has a talent, but I think my girls more would push the writing. But I think all 3 of them have a really good talent in writing, yes.
So we'll see a lot more from the Schwapp family.
Let's hope so.
Well, the story, Dew Angels, when I first saw it, I had no idea what to expect of this story. And I believe in angels. I don't believe in angels necessarily the way everybody else believes in angels. I don't necessarily believe in winged creatures, or anything like that. But I do believe that there are angels
that exist.
And I wasn't sure if when I opened it what I was going to find were angels. But what I found instead was a story about hope. A story about that bordered on many themes. But at the underlying part of it was resilience and just hanging on to these angels in your life that give you hope to go on. And I'm going to ask you to read a passage, one of my favorite passages from the book.
Sure. For
our audience. So they can get a feel as we go through and discuss the book, exactly what this book is about.
Then Delroy stood up. He pulled a long stalk from one of the bundles and wound it tightly around his index finger. Eventually, when the tip of his finger had swelled into a purple nub, he cleared his throat and pointed it at Nola. Nola, he said, I wish that you will always be like this grass, that no matter how the world bend you up, twist you around, try to beat you, you will always bend with it, but you won't ever break. Then he released the stalk so that it uncurled from his finger and fell at his feet. Nola stared at the twisted blade by his sneakers. Once more for the morning, she was struck speechless. She knew what Delroy was speaking about. He was speaking about that night, when she'd lain on the lawn, pounded first by her papa's fist, then by the rain. Heat crawled into her face, even as Dahlia grabbed the curled blade and stuffed it down the front of Grampy's sweater that she had excitedly pulled over her head.
Oh man, that passage for me, even after I read the whole book, that passage stood out because that was a passage of hope. Nola has been through so much in this book. And before we even get into the characters in the book, I'm just wondering how these fictional characters came up in your head, how these particular characters, who are very much a part of our Jamaican society, came up in your head. Welcome back to Shelf Life. We're talking with Melanie Schwapp about Dew Angels, her new book. Really, really good book. And Melanie, this book has so many themes in it, and themes that are very, very relevant to Jamaica. I think the biggest thing in this book, or the number one theme, is the fight between, believe it or not, still the black skin and the browning. And the main character, who is Nola, was very dark-skinned, but she come from a light-skinned family. And we all know that that happens a lot in Jamaica. And in this book, she's treated like not even second class. She's treated almost as bad as a dog because of the color of her skin. How did this particular theme come about? Was it something you saw? What triggered this?
I think growing up in Jamaica, in the era of my parents, you know, people had a lot of children. So my grandparents had 6 children, 9 children. And what you found in a lot of Jamaican families is because of such a large amount of children, you would have so many mixes that would come out.
Right.
And invariably, one would be looking maybe Chinese, one would look what we call Jamaica red, and sometimes one would be born very dark, darker than the rest of them. And I always heard stories about these children who were darker than the rest being told by grandparents or aunts and uncles that they were, for use of a better word, the helpless children or adopted, as a joke. And they grew up with this complex. They grew up carrying this burden all their lives. So whereas other people had moved on, the choices they made in lives were hampered by this feeling of not belonging and feeling
not
different
and
not being good enough.
There's a Jamaican saying which I hate to have to say it, but one of my grandmothers, who was, 1159, that's how dark skinned she was, black, 1159, looked at me, and her husband too was also jet black, and looked at me one time and said to me, I must marry a fair skinned man because if I don't know that anything black no good. And that came back to me as I read this book.
Yes.
Because Nola suffered from that thought that anything black
was not good. And you know what is amazing? That everybody I spoke to in writing this book had a similar experience with somebody in their family. And it shocked me because we're Jamaican. We're coming from out of many one people.
I looked at my grandmother and I said, have you looked in a mirror?
Yes. No, but they don't think of they think of themselves as, yes, they are this way, but they're going to give you a better life by making you what we call wash out the black. Yes. Which is why we have such a problem with bleaching now. Because people can't accept their skin color for what they are. So they try to make themselves know. They think they will have better opportunities with jobs, with finding a mate, in being brown-skinned.
Being a browning. The other theme that was very big for me in this book was the theme of family. But not family the way maybe you grew up and I grew up, where it was a loving family of people who just really cared for each other. This was a family that was seriously hurt by rejection, abuse. The mother was a victim of domestic abuse. Nola, because she was black and anything black no good, was a victim of abuse. But her sister, who was fair-skinned, was treated like the prized child by her father. And that happens a lot, or happened back then a lot. I don't know if it still happens.
Yes.
Because it didn't happen in my family. We have 2 fair-skinned and 2 darker-skinned siblings. Yes,
you find that. And then what happened in the book, there was a mention where her sister, as beautiful and accepted as she was, there was also a hint of abuse in another way.
In another way, yes, because her father was coming out of her room.
So I think what it shows you is that when you have a damaged family, it extends, the ripple effect extends in all aspects of it. So it wasn't just Nola in her way, it was more outright with Nola. But with her sister, it was more a hidden secret of her abuse.
So, and the mother clearly knew that there was all this abuse going on, but she was stuck in that cycle of this is the man that's providing for the family, so we just have to suck it up, hug it up. And
self-perseverance. She wanted to preserve herself, so what she did is she took an attitude of not seeing and not taking part. So she became almost like a shell. Her personality died in the marriage, and so the daughters were left to kind of fend for themselves.
And she didn't do very much to really protect the ones, protect the children themselves, because she was worried about living out on the street.
Exactly.
The other thing that was really very clear in this book was the resilience of these women and youngsters who were being abused. And a lot of our young people today are living with abuse. A lot of our women are living with the after effects of domestic abuse and domestic violence, and have had to be resilient and dig deep down into themselves to find that person. And that's why the passage I had you read was very important to me
Yes.
because this was a friend that she finally made who was giving her a birthday
Back
wish
home.
that she could carry with
That's
her
right.
through life. Melanie, I want to talk a little bit about some of the people in the book. Now, we talked earlier about Nola, who is the main figure, and her mom, and her sister, and obviously her father, who was very abusive. But Delia to me was an interesting character because Delia had this tough, rough exterior, but she really was a soft person.
Yes.
So Merlene and Delia, tell me about how those characters came into being.
Well, Merlene and Delia had a past, a very turbulent past. So when they came to Reading, which is where they met Nola, they had come with a past that they had no choice, nowhere else to go. And what they did is they bonded, mother and daughter. So even though Delia to the rest of Reading seemed to be this tough exterior, she had the softness of this love and this home environment from her mother that balanced her. So she had that softness that could reach out to Nola. She saw Nola's pain and she saw Nola's struggle.
And she realized that she and Nola had something in common.
They were the two outcasts, and they were two outcasts at school.
And Delia was also black.
Exactly.
And she had a busted lip and nose
Yes,
that
her
kind of
face was distorted. Right.
So she was black and ugly,
Right.
so to speak, like Nola.
But she didn't make it bother her because she had that at home. She was made to feel like she was perfect. She was a princess in her mother's home. So she didn't make it bother her as much as Nola, who didn't have it at home, made it bother her and become a problem for her.
And then Merlene was an outcast because she ran a local bar and den of iniquity.
Exactly. So she was an outcast from the women of, and then it shows the hypocrisy of the society because it shows that even though this was a den of iniquity and they were the outcasts, the men would go there in secret.
So your woman couldn't know.
Exactly. So it just shows in our society how much of the hypocrisy still exists. But you have the other side of it where Nola was surrounded by people who cared. So even though she had this struggle, the Dew Angels refers not just to the angels of Dew, but the people who helped to boost her all her life and take her through each struggle, like Delia and Merlene. Right.
And also Mad Aggie. Who I thought was an interesting character because Mad Aggie was like the local herb woman who, mother with her bush and everything. But she was actually quite not mad.
Right.
Her idea was that if I look mad, nobody will notice I'm watching them.
Exactly.
And Mad Aggie in the end ended up saving
Nola's
life.
Yes.
We move on to Nola has gotten out of Reading, which was such a hostile area because she couldn't stay there anymore. Her father would kill her because she's black and ugly, and she has moved on. And there's another character who is very real in our society, Eric.
The Don Man.
The Don Man.
Yes.
Tell me about Eric and what did you draw on to come up with Eric?
Eric, I think, shows a lot of our Jamaican men how charismatic they can be. And how they can win you over. But because of their own issues, a lot of the time hostility becomes the dominant part and violence in the relationship. So what happened to Eric is he won Nola and the family over. And he put his claws in the family and started to control everything they did. So he took over, in essence, all of their little town where they lived in, their little street. And
this is a new family now that she formed when she came out of Reading.
So because of Nola's struggle, she got this strength that she, being the outcast, was the one able to stand up to Eric. Because a struggle to her was nothing. Being rejected was nothing.
Yeah, being kicked was nothing. Being boxed down was nothing.
Exactly. So she found the strength to stand up to Eric Mackenzie of everybody else.
Her grandpa is the other person. Now, her grandpa was the one who told her the story of the Dew Angels. And I find it really great the way you brought grandpa's thoughts back every so often. Whenever things got really tough, grandpa would come back in her ears. Even though he was dead, his stories would come back to her. And I understand how that is because my father, who died 10 years ago, that's what he is for me. When I get really low, my father's words his teachings come back to me, his thoughts come back to me, and they really help to propel me on. So I find the characters in Dew Angels, they're varied, they really represent our Jamaican characters. And you really did a good job of bringing that out.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about Dew Angels, a book that you have to get. If it's not on your shelf, then you need to get it on your shelf. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been watching Shelf Life. I'll see you again next week, same time.